Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I hope you can see us and hopefully hear us okay. So let me just do some checks on that. So if anybody can write in the chat that you can hear us, yes or no. Where are you in the world today? So I'm Neve. Um, I have started Leaders for Accessibility. Oh, good morning. You can hear us? Perfect.
Hello,
That's
everyone.
great.
Hello.
Morning. So some people are in far off places calling in from Dublin, France. Great. Germany, nice. We probably won't get any from the USA today. Oh, South Africa. We are talking about the EU. And also it's a different time zone in the US. They're probably still asleep. Oh, we have a Texas there. Well, welcome,
Now I see a
Florida.
few people from the US, yeah, in the chat, so welcome and thank you for being here so early.
Yes. So welcome everybody. And thank you for even taking the time to come to the most postponed webinar in the history of webinars. So we didn't want to postpone anymore. And if people can't make it, then this is going to be recorded. Everything will be recorded now. If you need captions, you can get that in the three more actions, three dots, and you can go to language and speech, turn on live captions. That is quicker, I think, than the closed captions on that. If you want, I don't know how it's coming up on your screen. I think Microsoft has had a few hiccups in the last few days, which we might have heard about. So if you want to pin us on your screens, that might be a little bit easier. So let's kick off today's webinar anyway. So yes, I said I am Neve, a founder of TIGM and also Leaders for Accessibility. So today we'll talk about digital accessibility, the new EU Act and how to get prepared. You might notice that we are only three here and Danny unfortunately couldn't make it, but we do have Marco, who is a legal technologist, and we do have Anna, who is a UX designer and focuses on accessibility, who also just got a new job this week. So well done on that. But Marco, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Of course, with pleasure. Good morning, afternoon, night. It doesn't matter where you are. And thank you, Neve, for the opportunity. My name is Marco. I'm a legal technologist at TLT LLP in Bristol, UK. I'm absolutely in love with design thinking and its potential. That's exactly why I'm here. So I have a strong legal background, but I've tried my very best in the last few years to move away from law and trying to get into practice with tech and applications through user experience and user interface. So I'm very, very curious to know about Anna, what you're doing.
Thank you for popcorning it to me, Marco. So yeah, hello everyone, and thank you especially to early risers who are here with us. I am Anna Meisaros. I'm UX designer by trade, as Neve mentioned, but I focus on accessibility, so I often introduce myself as a T-shaped designer. If you know what that means, it means that I'm kind of a little bit a generalist of all things UX and design related, but I specialize heavily in accessibility, whereas the leg of my T is kind of coming from. In my last role, I was an accessibility lead for a product development org. And as also Neve mentioned, I started a new role at TechRo as a senior product designer this week. So yeah, a pretty busy week for me, and excited to talk about accessibility in the European legislation today.
Yeah, great. And I just want to say again, congratulations on getting a job, because it's not a great climate out there. There's a lot of people, especially in the accessibility world, that are looking for jobs. And I think that it's great that companies are, still offering those roles and maybe expanding budgets to try and hire more professionals. And even hopefully in today's talk, maybe there's people that don't have accessibility specialists within their organization. It might be something you think about as a contract part-time role. But let's look at today and why these things are quite necessary. So in this talk today, we're going to look at the Accessibility Act coming next year, what it means for your businesses or your software offering, how to implement changes quickly, and how to embed accessible design practices into your company and workflow. So some of you may have already started to think about this. Some of you may not. So we might have a wide scale. But we want this to be very practical and solution focused as well. So we will look at what things can you do, what things can you start thinking about and now. And everything will be recorded and there will notes be shared afterwards. But one question I'd like to ask the attendees as well is what type of industries are you in? You know, and this is because we're going to talk about the EU Act now, and it's quite a broad.
I think Microsoft is failing us for a few seconds. It's absolutely fine. It happens with airports, train stations, and everything. So let's wait for Neve to come back, hopefully. Otherwise, Anna, we need to improvise.
I'm seeing
manual.
people are sharing their industry in the chat. So yeah, I feel like a lot of those spaces will be impacted by the Accessibility Act. So
indeed,
yes, I hope this will be fairly relevant to all of you.
I can actually see in the chat, just to share it out loud, I can see public sector, finance, aviation, retail, transports. Pretty interesting. This mentioned quite a lot. Product design, obviously, university, sports. I think we are covering a lot, which is as exciting as scary, Anna, I will say. So we're going to try our very best to fill the gaps as much as we can. So let's wait for Neve to be back. But in the meantime, maybe I can kick off with a couple of updates, if you agree, Anna. Is that okay?
Yeah.
We go with like this kind of managing ourselves until our teacher comes back as good students.
Definitely, please go ahead.
Hey, Neve.
Oh, Neve, you're back. Okay, we're ready to improvise.
What's been happening this week, Microsoft? Let's okay.
Don't worry, Anna and I, we were like doing our homework very well, and we were trying to take initiative of what was happening next. But now you're back, so let's say the ownership is back to your court.
Great. Well, so we have questions, and what I wanted to do is just say that we did take questions from the audience, the attendees before. Yeah, great. I'm seeing all of your sectors in there as well. Some questions for the audience, which we're going to touch on, and so this is good as well. If I get knocked off, that we have these questions. A lot of the questions that I really saw from attendees was, in an overall sense, is how does it affect my business? What do I have to do? How do we interpret if we fall under it? How much e-commerce is a small bit. Do I really need to care? I work in England. We only have customers in England. Should we care? Is it applicable to enterprise? What is enforcement across the EU states? Now, there's lots and lots of questions there. And we are going to touch on all of those throughout the talk and others. And so you can feel free to add your questions there as well. So, I mean, even just from the beginning point of view, if we go to Marco and say, talk us through the EU Accessibility Act 2025. What products and services are included?
Of course. So this is definitely a hot potato you're handling to me directly, Neve. Not an easy one, but let me start with something I've actually learned from you and from leaders of accessibility, just to set the right tone with this online workshop. Something I've learned and taking and walking the talk and understanding the importance of accessibility with video calls. I've learned the importance also to describe ourselves, especially for visually impaired, because at the end of the day, it's also very important to empathize as much as possible before going into content. So it's something I learned from you, Neve. So I would like to make it and to apply that in practice for the first time, because I think it's very important. So I'm, let's say, white man, but Mediterranean, pretty tall, green eyes, bald, unfortunately. When I was 20, I was full of hair. Not anymore, unfortunately, too much studying. And well, I smile pretty often. So if you want to picture my face with a big smile on it, that's definitely a good picture. Now that I've somehow given my kind of physical introduction, please feel free to stop me or comment in the chat if I'm not clear with anything. Now, the EU Accessibility Act. Let me first of all start. I'm not here to provide you with legal advice. So in case you need specific legal advice, I strongly suggest you reach out to some specialists with recognized law firms here in the UK, in the EU. It doesn't matter as long as you reach out to professionals in your jurisdiction. Now, after this premise, with my background in law from both EU and UK jurisdiction, I can definitely give you some information and general hints about what it's all about. Let me give you some key takeaways because legal can be very jargony and very legalese. So we are here just to hover across the most important elements. The EU Accessibility Act is an EU directive which gives the mandate to member states to implement local laws. So they have their own capacity to make different versions and specific requirements in their own domestic legislation. It's a consumer-focused products and services directive, which wants to meet some minimum accessibility standards when we provide services. Individual member states also can choose to impose stronger requirements than required by the EU. And it's all about accessibility obligations, obviously. There are two key dates to remember. So first of all, the 28th of June 2025, so I will say approximately in 1 year, in scope, products and services released after that date must comply with local requirements. And specifically from the 28th of June 2030, so a few years after, all in-scope products and services must be compliant, regardless of where they've been released. We're going to focus a bit more later on the specifics to understand what is in scope and what is out of scope. Specifically, I would like to mention the Annex 1. This is my strong legal background now knocking to the door. We will develop that later, but it gives you, like, if you have a chance to Google it or to find it out in your research, the Annex 1 of the legislation, and I will more than happy share the links afterwards, gives some specific example about what's in scope. Penalties. If you don't comply, depending on your member state, you're going to have pretty high fines, or in some instances, even criminal sentences. So it's something very serious to take into account. Last but not least, there are some exemptions, very important. We're going to discuss upon that, but the biggest exemption is, for example, for small companies that have less than 10 employees and are not exceeding the 2 million euros turnaround. In terms of which products and services are included, that's a pretty interesting and definitely not easy way to answer, but so far I can give you a quick list. Oh, thank you. That's actually a great slide, Neve.
Here's one I prepared earlier.
Well, in that case, I think this is quite self-explanatory, but I can help the reading for the visually impaired, especially. And please be sure to stop me if I'm not clear. Within the EU Accessibility Act, there are two big families: products and services. Within the products, to give you some examples, and I'm quoting from the slides, we can refer to computers and operating systems, smartphones and other devices, ATMs and payment terminals, e-readers, and something that is particularly dear to me because I travel a lot and I always miss my tickets, ticketing and check-in machines. In terms of services, definitely phone services. So I will say potentially with the amount of smartphones going out there, we're potentially covering very much in terms of applications. Banking services, very much important too. E-commerce, website, e-books, and other minor services, but still relevant to this legislation. Neve, I want to be sure I don't become too lawyery, and I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty and it's also, I don't want to be boring and I want to engage with the audience. So I'm going to maybe pause and I'm going to ask you where to go next.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for that. And yeah, I that is the official list of things that are in scope at the moment. And that's why I asked as well people what your industries are in. And really what you can see is that from the amount of industries and sectors people are in, you do touch on one of these aspects somewhere along. So there's very few industries or companies that are not supposed to comply with any of this, you know. But really, I'll if we look at it, okay, this is what you have to do. Your products and services need to be accessible. What does that mean, or what are the benefits of that? Like, what about SaaS? Yes, exactly. So, well, I think it's more consumer focused. But one thing that I was going to make mention is even in your enterprise software, a lot of organizations are hiring people with disabilities. There's people with that are blind in an organization using assistive technologies, and really it's about thinking about all of those people as well. So Anna, what's your take on this?
I can definitely comment on this one as someone who has only worked in SaaS spaces, but I have definitely seen how this will apply to those spaces as well. And that's through the customers of your services. So say you're a B2B SaaS product, you're working on a B2B SaaS product, but the companies who are using your product are usually using it to service their own customers, and they might fall under the those categories that you see on the screen. And an example could be, say you're offering communication software like Microsoft Teams, and in and of itself, it does not fall under those categories, but it might be used by a air, bus, or rail service to talk to their customer support customers, for example, to service them. So through that, you kind of already start entering this space. So it's always important to understand that accessibility, compliance, and in general, making things accessible is important not only directly for your own product, but for your customers to be able to serve their customers. So it's a chain, and through that chain, you can always end up in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that I think we need to think about, yes, there's this directive coming and it's saying, oh, things must be accessible. And a lot of people are saying, but do I need to do it? Do we need to do anything? And really, what my sense is from looking at people's questions and the attitude to this is, I think maybe there needs to be a mindset shift. So when we have something in the digital environment, it's so much easier to not see or ignore the barriers that exist. And I have an image of a person in a wheelchair, and I know sometimes people in wheelchairs like don't use us always as an example, and I apologize if anybody here feels like I'm doing that, but I think that sometimes when we have something physical and visible in the world, it we can empathize more with it and we can see how it impacts their business. But in the digital world, it's so easy for us to ignore those because we can't see our customers. We don't know how many customers have landed on our site and left because of an issue, not because of they didn't want your product. We don't have the data around it. We don't have that connection to the individual. And really, you know, we are ignoring these barriers, and it is actually something that's bad for business as well. One of the questions was about customer service. Should our customer service be accessible? Well, if you think about in the last few days what's happened, imagine somebody that is deaf, is blind, has cognitive impairments going to the airport, and you know all of the planes are gone or cancelled. How can they interact with your customer service? You know, so really it's about kind of thinking, can every individual have the equal opportunity to be able to access a product or a service? And we really need to look at that in a different way when we kind of think of the accessibility. And so one thing we mentioned as well about exemptions. So were there any exemptions, Marco? You're on mute there.
classic on mute. I'm back. Exemptions. Frankly, is not very simple. There's a golden rule generally. So to start, like in a funnel structure, if you are under 10 employees with an annual turnaround under 2 million euros, you are exempted. This is the general golden rule. Having some experience with the law, I'm sure this rule will be shaped. Case laws will appear, exceptions will happen. So this is how to approach and resonate. Apart from that, and I want to quote because I want to try to be as much as specific, at least for the so-called micro enterprise. After this golden rule, for other businesses, there's a specific exemption that may apply if required for the adaptation of a product or service to achieve compliance. Let me read it because it's important to focus on this. So if we are discussing about, for example, let's give a concrete example. If we are discussing about a digital product, so services that are delivered online on the World Wide Web, but the same service can also be interpreted as a tech product. So sometimes services and products can overlap as definitions. In other words, there's a specific exemption that says if you need to somehow, you have an already existing product and service, digital, and you need to adapt it to the European Accessibility Act, if such adaptation requires a significant change in the product or services that results in a fundamental alteration of its basic nature, so if you're completely, let's say, altering its nature and roots, that can result in so-called, like the law says, we find it unfair somehow, you are imposing a disproportionate burden to the business. So in that case, you might have an exemption. To make it simple, if you have an already existing digital product or service, and somehow apparently you're out of scope of the European Accessibility Act, if your effort towards making it compliant to the Act are completely disproportionate to the point that you're going to completely revolutionize the product that you have created, you might be exempted. Again, this is the law, unfortunately, which means on the kind of struggle side, there will be many exemptions and case studies that will become case law. So we need to watch this space to understand on a day-to-day how this is going to develop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good points there. And we have a question about, does the EU Act enforce the same requirements upon a foreign company with operations and services within the EU? And does the Act apply to internal employee-facing applications as well? My understanding of that is yes, is that if you are operating within an EU country, you are under the laws of that country. Really, if I don't know, Anna, do you have anything on that, or same with the internal employee-facing applications? Does it specifically cover anything on internal?
Yeah, I think that is, as Marco kind of alluded to in the beginning, we're not offering legal advice here, and it will depend on the type of internal employee-facing applications that you're talking about. As we like discussed the types of products and services that fall under this act, I think this will be important to interpret what internal-facing software might be applicable or not.
Yeah. I think that it goes back to one of the questions about we're in England. Maybe you only sell in England. But if your services or customers are outside, or if they're in the EU, you're still under the Act. But there's also, I mean, this is not the only act about equality, about accessibility. There's also the, is it the Equalities Act 2010, Marco?
Sorry to interrupt, just because it's so much on point that I wanted to be sure that I can flag it right now. So if you are dealing, even though you're not resident as with your product or service in the EU, but if you're dealing with the EU or any one of your customers is EU-based, you must comply with the EEA Oh dear Lord! And now
EAA.
with my dyslexia, it's going to be very fun now with spelling. But European Accessibility Act. So it doesn't matter where you're based. If you're dealing with customers that are based in the EU, you must comply with the act. To get it practical, just mentioning something that Anna said, and to be sure that we keep this conversation as practical as possible, to understand how the case law and the EU's cases, let's say the studies day by day will evolve. Something that is going to be happening is the so-called self-assessment, similar to what happened with the GDPR. Undertaking a self-assessment, you will understand if you need to comply, up to what degree, if you are subject to an exemption. So again, as soon as the law is going to be effective in full, a new world in terms of applications and compliance will kick off.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing to remember on this is with this legislation, the more people that know about it, the more people with disabilities, whether they're your employees or your customers, the more they are aware of their rights. And it might also be more, or it might give them the reason to actually stand up for their rights as well. So if there is an internal system within your organization that isn't accessible, and maybe you haven't created it, right? But under the Equality Act, they should have equal access to that. So there are some companies that when you are procuring new software into your organization, it's also important to make sure that that software is accessible for your employees within the organization as well. So so it might be that people start to come forward a little bit more and share that they need something. So do consider the systems that you're buying in as well. And so when we talk about accessibility, or what do, a question here, Anna, for you, what key things are the most pressing accessibility areas to address when making sure the product is moving towards being accessible? And I'm not sure if everybody on the call is maybe familiar with the WCAG guidelines. I see some people mentioning WCAG guidelines in there. If you're not familiar with them, maybe Anna, you could give an overview of some of those guidelines and key things to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So important to understand, and Marco, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the Act itself enforces compliance with what is called EN 301549 directive, which is a European standard for accessibility. But under that, the main standard that they're referencing is WCAG 2.1 AA, which is an international accessibility guidelines, standards that are widely used for different types of legislation worldwide as kind of the point of reference. They're created by W3 Consortium, which is World Wide Web Consortium, right? And you probably know this organization as a creator of many, many other standards, such as HTML, CSS, and other kind of universally used things across the web. Those standards are created by a group of experts, professionals, and disability experts as well, who all kind of review it, reference it, test it across time. A lot of you who have already been moving in the space will be familiar with the fact that a new version of this guidelines came out in December of last year, 2.2. But for now, the EN 301549 references 2.1 AA still. So that's kind of the previous international standard. And why it's important to understand that it's not just WCAG. There are additional considerations that this like European standard adds, but kind of at the basis of it, especially when we talk about like web products, it's the WCAG 2.1. And I think it's going to be impossible to move in this direction if you want to become compliant without familiarizing yourself with those guidelines. So if you aren't familiar, I would highly advise just going to W3 websites and just looking at the guidelines themselves. They can be kind of scary at first and maybe hard to understand, but there's a lot of materials and resources out there that you can reference to understand it. And yes, thank you so much, Neve. This is kind of the great baseline to understand the guidelines. They are broken into 4 main principles that form the abbreviation POUR, P-O-U-R, which is perceivable, which means that you should be able to kind of perceive the content displayed with at least one of the senses available to you. Operable, which means that you should be able to navigate and interact with the content regardless of technology that you're using, be it like standard consumer level devices or assistive technology. Understandable, that regardless of your kind of level of understanding or any kind of learning disabilities you might have, you should be able to understand what's displayed. And finally, robust, which means that content, website, application should work with any level of assistive technology, be it kind of legacy technology or modern technology, and it shouldn't break apart upon people using assistive technology interacting with the content. So that's how kind of those guidelines are broken down. And then each high-level principle is broken down into specific success criteria that are those statements that should be true about your application. For example, that all non-text content should have like alternative description. And there's, I think, 78 success criteria in 2.1 AA. So compliance essentially means that you have answered each of those success criteria with kind of, yes, that's true about our software, about our application, about our website, and so on.
Yeah, thanks. If anybody is new to the WCAG, and thanks for the abbreviation, what it means, because I don't even know what the 4 letters stand. Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We actually, I am a member of the organization creating the guidelines. We work on the cognitive task force because we focus on language and measuring that. So I can see a lot of questions. WCAG itself, I will say, is very overwhelming. The irony is it's not very accessible, and really, is it WCAG 2.1 AA or 2.2 AA? In terms of the level of compliance for this, I don't know specifically, but I think if you are showing that you are working towards compliance with some of these, and I think the 2.1 AA standard, at least for now, because by the next year, WCAG is going to bring out version 3. So there's 2.1, 2.2, and then there'll be version 3. But if you're setting things at a 2.1 or working towards it, at least you're working towards it. What a lot of people in accessibility will say is that these guidelines are the baseline. So this shouldn't be your goal to just achieve the baseline of compliance. Really creating more accessible sites is the goal overall. How can you check? So one question was there is, how can you check that you are compliant? Can you recommend audits or websites? So Anna?
Yes, I mean, at the baseline, if you want to state officially that you are compliant, what you need to be mindful of is VPATs or ACRs, voluntary process. Okay, I will not remember how VPAT is deciphered, but ACR is Accessibility Compliance Conformance Report, which are those very legal documents which just list, for example, WCAG criteria, as well as Section 508 and others, where you just go through each in regards to a specific part of your software and state your level of compliance between compliant, not compliant, compliant with exceptions, or not applicable, and then kind of describe in detail what might be missing. So that is just kind of on a very bare bones trying to make a statement about your compliance. But in general, trying to, in practice, make sure that your compliant is usually broken down into a combination of automated and manual testing. So there are many tools. I think people in the chat have recommended several, such as Axe-based tools. Axe is a DQ product set of rules implemented via different browser extensions, CI/CD tools, and so on, that you can kind of use in your process to test for various automated checks based on guidelines. But most, like for example, Axe rule set itself only tests for about 30 or 40% of all 78 success criteria. And there's things that are impossible to be at the moment tested in an automated way. For example, if alternative descriptions of images are meaningful or offer a good description of what's on the image. At the moment, automated tool does not really do a good check of that. A human needs to validate that that's true. So yes, I think everyone is also saying this in the chat. At the moment, the best you can do is establish a good combination of automated and manual testing that will cover all 78 criteria for you, for your process.
Mm-hmm. And we're gonna there's a lot of things mentioned there in the chat and by Anna as well. And we'll share out the links and the names for a lot of the recommended sites. And I will just say while we're on this topic that if you do go and then start looking for tools and you see tools that say plug this code into your website, this AI solution is going to fix your entire website, you need to be really careful about overlay companies or about companies saying big fixes with AI. Yes, so there are big companies there that will say, look, plug this into your site, it will magically make it accessible, and they charge you a fee for that. But actually now some of those companies that have been using those plugins or AI solutions, they are now being sued by customers because basically these are kind of like the modern day snake oil companies, because there are so many elements of accessibility that needs human intelligence, and beyond the WCAG guidelines, which there are, what you say, Anna, 78 success criteria. For me, I had to break it down really simply. And I kind of think, okay, what areas are there? And for me, I break it down into 3 areas, and you might think of others. I think the information. Is the information we're given to people clear and easy to understand? Are they able to navigate, so with the keyboards or stuff, are they able to navigate through the customer journey easily? And is the design good enough that it is not that it is not taken away from the experience for people? Companies put a lot of money into advertising spend, social media spend, and they forget about the point of sale. If your point of sale has low contrast, low, poor navigation, and you lose a customer, you don't actually know you've lost a customer because it was simply about your color. But companies are still going to waste their money up at the top end. So when you think about what's key in accessibility, it's what's key for you. And just why should we think about this? It's not just about the law. Sites and services with accessibility issues are bad for business, right? We have data now showing that there's a higher return on investment if you have accessible services. With my own company, we found in e-commerce, complexity in descriptions and information lowers your sales. So that's not great. And actually, I think Kay Moores is on this call, and I wanted to reference Kay Moores, who is great and always pointing out issues that companies have. So even as something color contrast, you can see here Dulux, it's very difficult to see the information they have there, even though they've paid a lot of money for people, designers. It's you, I think, is is another one. So when you have font on top of the images, it makes it very difficult as well for people. Even if you don't have any issues, it just makes it more difficult for people to engage with content. And there's some very simple things that you can start to look at. Are you describing images? Are you talking about your products with alt text and things like that? If you're not, the experience for somebody online is like going into a shop and trying to decide what to buy, what to buy when there's really no descriptions there. So is there alt text? Is there white text on top of yellow? Yeah. Oh my eyes. Yes. I'm glad that was Itsu, not me. So just very simple things there: color, contrast, alt text. What are things, Anna, could people even now, just with fresh eyes that are not hurting, to look at their own websites, look at their own journeys, customer journeys, and maybe think, what could be better?
So powerful,
You're on
Neve.
mute now. So a lot of these solutions are free. A lot of these solutions just involve, thinking, is the color contrast strong enough? So Anna, any other things that people can take a look at right after this that could cost them nothing but could start them on their compliance journey?
Yeah, I would recommend honestly breaking it down into role-based approach, which is what worked for the orgs I worked at in the past, and kind of breaking it down into what you can shift left and what designers can cover when they're creating something. That is honestly the best way to approach this, because design is the kind of cheapest part of development to iterate and add changes, as opposed to once you're ready, so to say, bake the muffin and are trying to add blueberries afterwards, after the development. So I would say designers who are in charge of creating, mock-ups and handing them off to development are always the best place to look at a lot of different success criteria, from color contrast to like alternative text descriptions to a semantic heading structure, good labels, errors, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of checklists already available out there that you can modify based on like your specific product needs. And then with that, can have a lot of success criteria covered out of the door before the designer hands something off to development. So I would say that is the best way to approach this. And then of course, all the automated tools that we discussed and people mentioned in the chat are great for quality assurance, for QA and development once you've started building something. And there are also tools that help you kind of highlight issues as you go, as you develop. I'm not a developer, but I know there's like linting plugins and other things that can highlight issues in code directly as you're building something. So I feel like if you can approach this with kind of role-based approach, where designers take over as much as they can and hand it off with accessible documentation, then developers kind of take charge of building things with accessibility tools kind of added. And then QA can add accessibility as part of quality assurance, use all the acts, for example, and other automated tools, and manual testing, such as keyboard navigation testing, testing with a screen reader. Then those three levels will offer a very good output in terms of compliance at the end. And you can start today by looking into how you can add those things into your process.
Yeah, definitely. Marco, to you.
Hey, Neve, I'll be super quick, but Anna keeps mentioning very cool things as a designer, and then my brain wakes up with with how I can apply design into the legal space. If there's any lawyer in the room, please give me a shout, write a comment, so I feel less alone. But what I wanted to stress is also, even a very traditional sector like the legal one is moving progressively towards the legal design as a concept, especially for B2C, so business to consumers contracts. Can we call a contract a product or a service? I don't know. It's not for me to decide. What matters is that still we have lawyers, or generally law firms, or generally companies dealing with customers and sharing their own contracts. What I'm trying to say is that through legal design is also trying to applying the importance of delivering accessible and comprehensible content, using the design thinking methodology to make things accessible, simple, understandable, to be sure that you improve client retention, your customer trust, which is everything, and how to be sure that you comply also somehow with the new legislation. So I'm very interested to see if there's going to be any connections or interconnections between the European Accessibility Act, legal services, design. Let's watch this space.
Yeah, and I think all the points there by Anna are really Really good. And I want to just mention, somebody was dissing Canva there in the chat as well, saying these problems are made when we use Canva. I use Canva a lot. I'm not a designer, I'm not an engineer. I actually think the problems come from a lack of awareness. I think there's a lot of designers there that just haven't learned the fundamentals of accessibility. And so that's even now going back to your own companies, your own just looking at things. Is really important. It is for some questions there. It is for mobiles as well as websites. It is the responsibility of the software company. If you're creating something, it's up to you to make it accessible, not just for the customers of it as well. And so I will kind of we'll move on a little bit so we can give some practical tips and some things that maybe you want to think about as well. But when we looked at what are the key accessibility issues to focus on, that's going to be different for every single organization. So we have people there in ad tech and e-commerce and SaaS. And really you have to go back and you have to look at your own product. And the guiding question really is, does everybody have the same chance to access a service or buy a product? For my own company, we built a SaaS platform um, before thinking of all of this. And then I learned, I have potential customers who are blind. Have we built accessibility into it? And you do have to go back to the code. It's easier for a small company, but you do have to go back to all of that. And that should really be the guiding question. Can somebody who's deaf use it? Can someone who's blind use it? Can somebody who has cognitive impairments, low literacy, understand it? And so if you think about that from information, navigation, design, are all of those things aligned? And the problem is you might not get all of those at once. And I think that this, maybe Anna kind of answered that a little bit. One of the problems is the decentralization of a lot of organizations, and how do we get those processes and systems within an organization? One thing that you've set up before, Anna, in companies has been employee resource groups. And maybe is it about not just systems and processes first, but maybe mindset, is that the word? Mindset shifts, cultural shifts. How are we raising awareness, within the organization?
One thing from my own practice that I feel has a big chance at succeeding is internal accessibility champions programs, where people from different departments and roles kind of raise their hand and say, I want to learn more about this, and I want to dedicate some of my time to improving accessibility, however it pertains to my role. And that's not just designers or developers, that can be people in legal, like Marco here, or people in sales and customer support. And that's usually actually very helpful to have people from kind of big horizontal cut from like your company, because they can bring different problems up. They have their own kind of part of the company that they know better. So that's great. But also, I will say the decentralization problem also comes from the top very often. And it's very hard to achieve compliance without kind of high level buy-in, which is a topic that you'll hear a lot about if you go to any accessibility conference or accessibility space. We are all always talking about how do we get buy-in? How do we ensure that like management and leadership is on board, offering us a sponsorship and prioritization? I do not have a magic bullet for this question. It's a lot of advocacy and involving a lot of people, getting allies internally that will help you advocate for it. And yeah, if anyone has better advice on this, I'm also would be curious.
I think what we need is more data around this, more return on investment. Like I said, with the image, we can't see the barriers. We don't know the barriers that are there in the digital world. And the more that we look for information and data that is going to show the people at the top that it's good for business, well, then we can get investment. But at the moment, there is really a data deficit around a lot of this. And so we're trying to do work studies on, if you improve the customer journey, if you make the color contrast better, if you improve the navigation, do your sales increase? And when we have that data, so it's really important for all of us kind of interested in it to look at your systems, look at your customers, and I always ask, if you're doing user testing, are you testing with users that are blind, deaf, other literacy, cognitive issues? You know, where are you getting your information from? Is it the same sample size, the same sample group all the time? Because that will be biased, and you are, you know, missing out on a high number of customers, because people with disabilities have money and they're trying to spend it. So, you know, do let them. Marco, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I'm going to give some recommendations of sites and tools that you can use, bring back to your organization. You know, but if you want to add anything there, Marco.
Nothing to add specifically on this point, Neve. Thanks. I can see from the chat that a few people are rightly so asking, what about my jurisdiction, where I can read and follow the developments. So far, the best place, at least from a legal compliance perspective, is always to refer to your Lex. I've shared a link in the chat, which is the main source for the European directive. So over there, they will progressively share the updates, especially close to date on the implementation date. And for your own jurisdiction, the best way is to follow your own journal in the jurisdiction. Here in the UK, is called the Law Gazette. We haven't touched upon the UK because it's a slightly different place, but it will apply also for UK people if they're dealing with EU customers, by all means. And briefly, in the UK, we already have a couple of legislations in place. The Equality Act 2010, above everything, even though it's slightly different, is focused more on the people rather than products and services. Nothing to add from that specific point of view, but I strongly just suggest we live and learn together on what the developments are, because it's a very fluid development and in development situation. So as long as we have some solid backgrounds, some solid foundations of what it's all about, it's a living thing. If I have once per minute, maybe, Neva, I can just conclude at least my contribution with a few simple recommendations of what a business should do if they find themselves compliant, or somehow they think they fall within the scope. I can mention just 5. So first of all, the first step to understand is to understand if your products or services are in scope with the Act. So you need to do your own homework at home to understand what you're doing, what you're delivering, and then potentially, in this case, asking for legal advice to understand if you are in scope. What role your business performs in relation to the in-scope product or services, if you're a manufacturer, if you're an importer, if you're a distributor, or you're just a service provider. Then understanding if there's any requirements for specific accessibility for your own product or services. Let's mention visual impairment, let's mention hearing impairments and others. Whether the features of the service or product is accessible, and if user testing is required. I think people like Anna should have definitely a lot of job to do from next year onwards, because it's important to test your products and services. Last but not least, as I mentioned before, the so-called disproportionate burden on fundamental alterations on services and products can be your safe harbor to fall out of scope of the Act. But again, it's on a case-by-case scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And I see a few so really good points there. I think I even spelled it wrong, but some of the solutions and things that you might be looking for, I saw about UX agencies. Kay Moores is on the call. So on Leaders for Accessibility, we are putting together resources for solutions and specialists that you can find to bring in the tools, bring in the people for advice, including Anna, including Marco, including myself. Other leadersforaccessibility.com. For design and product teams, there's a great software called Get Stark or Stark, and I'll share I'll share any of these resources and also follow up. Oh, sorry. Getstart.co is the first one there. They all merged in together. For other things that we also have solutions for, if you want to make your website inclusive for deaf visitors, people with literacy issues, Signly gives you the opportunity, gives deaf customers the opportunity to get your website translated into sign language, because for a lot of people, English isn't their first language, signing is their first language. So Signly have a great plugin. You plug it into your website, somebody requests translation, and then a sign language interpreter will translate the website for them. Read Speaker helps people with literacy issues, dyslexia, maybe English isn't their first language, to be able to listen to the information on your website as well. So there's additional things that you can add on to your websites as well as that. One thing as well that because we have so many specialists now with the Leaders for Accessibility, going to a big consultation can be very costly, even if you're a small company. So what we're starting to offer now is like a 1 hour video call review, so that you can show your website with specialists and they can walk you through some things. It could be about the contrast, it could be about moving images. It's only a low touch, kind of light touch review, but it's a low cost starting point for anybody who just wants to know, where should we even start with accessibility, because it can be such a huge area, especially if you go to the WCAG guidelines first, it can be overwhelming. So on the website then, you can find specialists like Marco if you want to talk about legal design, Anna, UX and accessibility. Myself, I focus on language and e-commerce and customer journeys. But we've lots and lots of other solutions there for customer experience as well. Signly do support BSL and ASL. They will also be moving into Irish Sign Language as well. And they're great. 2 banks in the UK just announced partnership with them this week, Santander and the Building Society, I think. So they're doing great things there. So yeah, leadersforaccessibility.com, you can find specialist solutions, but you can also ask us more questions, because we really want to put on more events like these, raise awareness, start talking about it, bring together a community, because yeah, I think all of us are learning. All of us are learning all the time. There's new things coming out all the time as well. And yeah, I think it's about us all supporting each other rather than saying, ooh, you're bad. It's about, hey, how about you do this instead? And let's see the impact it has on your customers, trust, engagement, brand, all of those things. And, that'd be super. So Anna, I don't know if you want to have any additional sites or things to recommend.
No, I think honestly, people in the chat recommended a lot of great resources, and also Niamh, you mentioned a lot of great ones. I feel like once you start learning about accessibility and start kind of dipping into that space, you'll see the same tools and resources recommended over and over, because they're really kind of the best ones. But I think we'll make sure to put together kind of a package of recommendations. For example, we talked about automated manual testing, and there's points of reference for that and tools. So yeah, we'll make sure to share something afterwards.
Yeah, and I'm just put the link I put in previous, it all mushed together. So there's one for Signly and Get Stark and Read Speaker, so you can send inquiries to them, and all of this will be sent out in an email as well. So yeah, do connect with me on LinkedIn, Anna and Marco, and I'll put their information in the chat as well. So thank you everyone for taking the time to join us after we've postponed this many times, and taking the time out of your day. It's definitely a conversation that we will continue to have, and we really want, with the Leaders for Accessibility network and community, to be a place for everybody to come for support, for advice, recommendations, and yeah, so you can find all of us there. Thanks for your engagement and time, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and
Thank
Neve for
you.
organizing this.
Yeah, Neve,
You're very welcome.
amazing.
Thank you. I'm
Real
back
clap
to my lamb
for
sip now.
surviving and making this real in the end.
It happened.
Yes.
Yay. Okay. Chat to everyone soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye. Bye.
you. Bye bye.